fellow Toastmasters, honored guests. The past 2 weeks are going to decide the next 2 years of my life. 2 years or more. I've had the same job for 10 years. It's the job that I had when I graduated out of school. I've worked for an amazing company. They've done so much for me, but it's time to move on. My resume is only this long, and I want to make it this long. And I was very anxious because I had interviewed, I didn't have a resume, I didn't have any of that. And like with anything I do, I like to research stuff. So I did a lot of research on how to create the perfect resume, on how to create a cover letter, on how to interview. And there's a lot of good information out there, there's a lot of bad information out there. And there's also a lot of information that's repeated over and over again. And it's very key fundamental tips that sometimes you overlook. And what I wanted to do today is share with you some of these tips. I have 5 or 6 tips that I will mention, and then give you an anecdote in my interviews where that really helped. So the very first one is about studying what the company does. And not just doing a cursory look, but actually understanding what their objective is, what their services are, what software they have, and study it very well. And so I interviewed last week, and I was going to interview with 5 people. I sat down, and the gentleman walks in. He's this older man with a deep British voice, and he's very cold and almost mean, and he's interrogating me. And he's looking at my resume, and he's saying, "You've been here for 10 years. That's unusual. Why do you want to leave? Why do you want to work for us? What do you know about the job?" And my heart was beating so hard, I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, and I was just trying not to act nervous, and I was relaxed, I was smiling, and pretending to not be uncomfortable, but I answered candidly. And then he asked me a very technical question. But because I had studied what the company did, I was able to give a very accurate answer, a very correct answer. And he smiled and he goes, "Samir, out of every candidate we've interviewed, you're the only one who's answered the question correctly. So, hey, congratulations. I like you. And because I like you so much, I'm going to tell you a secret. The next guy you're going to interview with is the VP. And he does something called the bullshit test, where he looks at your resume, asks you casually, what are 3 things on there that you're good at? And then he goes for the jugular. He will ask you every hard question on those 3 topics. So I'm just forewarning you, be ready." I thanked him. Now the second tip that you see online a lot is about printing your resume. Bring copies of your resume. I was like, okay, I'll just do that. And that saved me instantly, because the VP walked in and the resume was gone. The British guy had taken the resume. Fortunately, I was able to whip one out, hand it to him, and we continued. And he was very nice, very casual. And then toward the end of the, he's trying to sell me the company. And then towards the end, he looks at my resume and goes, "Oh, so what are 3 things on here that you're good at?" And that's where, something else you need to know about your resume is when you put something on your resume, make sure you can talk at length about every point on it. If you don't know something so well, don't put it on your resume. So I pointed out the first 3 things on my resume, and he went for the jugular. He asked me every hard question he could, and I did some verbal karate and fended him off, and he liked me in the end. He goes, "Samir, it's a very good interview, and I'm going to tell you a secret. The guy 2 interviews from now is very technical. His name's Technical Mike. He's so technical, just beware, just be ready." Shook his hand. Now, the next person that came in was a project manager. She had just joined the company, and one thing you'll see online a lot is the suggestion not to study only technical issues, but also behavioral issues. Things like, when was the last time you had a conflict with a coworker, and how did you deal with it? How did you use creativity to solve a problem? Questions like that. And so I went through about 100 of these questions, practicing what I would say Toastmaster style. And sure enough, she had printed out the top 10 questions, behavioral questions to ask in an interview. And I could tell, I hadn't been to that site, but it was just the basic questions. And she started by asking, when was the last time you had a conflict with a coworker, and how did you deal with it? How did you use creativity to solve a problem? So I was so happy that I had prepared. Sure enough, I hit the ball out of the park. And she goes, "You know what, I like you, and I need to warn you, Technical Mike is coming in next. And he's very technical, so be ready." And so the other thing you need to know about interviewing is be ready to ask questions. Certainly they're going to ask you questions, but if you have a set of questions that are coherent, that are smart, that are pertinent to the job, it shows that you've done your research. So Technical Mai walks in, and he's this younger Asian guy with thick black glasses, and he's looking at me like I'm his prey. And he sits down across me, picks up my resume, looks at it, looks at me, looks at it, and goes, "So you speak French?" I go, "Yeah, it's my mother tongue." And he's like, "Oh, so you're from Montreal, Canada. I have family from Montreal, Canada. That's cool. Oh, you went to McGill University. I've heard such good things about that school. You know what? You're cool. I won't ask you any technical questions. Do you have questions for me?" And on one hand, I was so happy because here's Technical Mike giving me a free pass. But on the other hand, I had to fill up the next half an hour with questions. And so fortunately, I had a long list of pertinent questions to the job, and I got to ask him and show how interested I was in the position. So at the end, he got up and shook my hand, and he goes, "I look very forward to hopefully working with you." So all in all, it was a great interview experience. And as an aside, I do want to say that Toastmasters has definitely impacted my ability to talk in a semi-coherent fashion under stress. If it wasn't for me coming here, there is no way I would have acted the same way in interviews. And so for the guests that we have here, if you're considering joining or coming more often, I absolutely recommend you coming because it will change your life. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Toastmasters and guests.